Hello everyone, it's Dan and I am back again talking about something that I truly love, and that is skin science. And I thought, well, what would be a really interesting, somewhat complex topic to talk about for our first segment on skin histology, and that is the process of melanogenesis and the cell that helps with all this melanogenesis nonsense, which is the melanocyte. So if you want to learn more about your skin, because we all have melanocytes and we all go through melanogenesis, say that 10 times fast, melanogenesis, then stay tuned. I still haven't done my intro. I think this might just be it from now on, guys. But my name is Dan and I am your beauty therapist. If you want to learn more from a qualified beauty therapist that actually knows what they're talking about, make sure you stay tuned. Make sure you like, you ring that bell icon, and you subscribe. And why not share to your friends or even watch more videos, because there's other videos on my channel. I'll see you all soon, guys, and make sure you comment and let me know what you think of this topic, melanogenesis and melanocytes. That's the one. Bye. I've gone through a journal article which helps me to back up all of my claims, which I've linked down below and referenced down below in the description box. So it was published in 2016 by the International Journal of Molecular Sciences, and it is a review titled Signaling Pathways in Melanogenesis. So if you want to go look it up and have a bit of a read, off you go. But this is going to be my own version of what I've read here, with obviously, of course, my input and that Daniel Christopher explanation. Woohoo. So, where do we start on this topic? Let's start with what melanogenesis is. Melanogenesis is the production of melanin. What produces melanin? Melanin is produced by a cell in the epidermis, the base of your epidermis, called a melanocyte. And a melanocyte goes through many different chemical and enzymatic reactions within the cell to produce melanin, which melanin is that color that we have in our skin. So when you look at the color of your skin, what do you see? What I see is I see a base color. I might also see something like some freckles. And also I might see patches where it's actually lighter than my base color. And what's responsible for all of this? It's your melanocyte. It's producing pigment that goes inside of cells, which helps to actually protect your DNA. And this is what we're going to dive into today. Where shall we start? Let's start where it all begins, and that is in your melanoblasts. So during your embryonic stages of development, you have melanoblasts. So where do they go? They go into parts of your bones, your nervous system, your heart, your eye. It goes into many different places, and the way that these cells then develop and the function that they're needed then develops into the cell type, which is a little bit complex and we won't really go into it. But all we need to know is that you've got these melanoblasts that develop in other cells, and one of these cells that these melanoblasts develop into is called your melanocyte. And melanocytes are generally, for the most part, in the base layer of your epidermis. And the role of these melanocytes is to produce pigment as a defensive mechanism. So let's talk about the actual shape of a melanocyte. A melanocyte isn't just a round cell. Think of it like this. You've got your body of the cell here, and then you've got these projections. These projections are called dendrites, and this So these dendrites then spurt off in between other cells that sit around the melanocyte, and those cells are called keratinocytes. So you've got your base layer, you've got your melanocyte, and then you'll have mother cells of keratinocytes along your dermal epidermal junction, which is this base layer here. Okay, these melanocytes stay anchored to the dermal epidermal junction. These mother cells also stay put along the dermal epidermal junction, but then the keratinocytes split off from the mother cell, and then they move up, which is then what gives us the surface layer. These keratinocytes migrate up, they flatten out, and they keratinize, and that's what gives us our protective layer. So why have these little cells, our melanocytes, why do they have these dendritic arms? It is because these dendritic arms help to reach multiple keratinocytes, which then allow for an appropriate disbursement throughout all of the keratinocytes of melanin. Why does the melanosome with the melanin need to go into the keratinocyte? This is to allow for an even coverage of melanin and that color. What does this melanin actually do? Melanin helps to protect our cells from DNA damage, from UV radiation. It does this by absorbing UV radiation before it can reach our DNA strands. When UV radiation hits our DNA strands multiple times, what then occurs is a mutation of that DNA strand. When a mutation of the DNA strand occurs and it's unrepairable, it then continues to reproduce that DNA fault, like we were talking about with the mother cells of the keratinocytes. That's reproduced and reproduced and reproduced. So that DNA strand is being reproduced again and again and again, even though it's faulty. What then happens is those cells can then be turned into cancerous cells. When the DNA strand is too corrupt, then you have things like precancerous lesions, which then turn into cancerous lesions over time from enough DNA damage. And because of that, that's why we need melanin in our skin. Let's talk about the actual process of melanogenesis. I'm not going to get into all the nitty-gritty of it. This is just going to be a general overview. But what happens is the melanocyte, to start producing something more than our base layer, and sometimes our base layer as well, is something to trigger it. And that is something like your genetics, outside factors and internal factors. From that, a plethora of enzyme and hormone reactions occur within the cell. Within the cell, we need to transport the melanin out of the cell, and that is done by a subtype of organelle called a liposome. That liposome actually has a term which is called a melanosome. The melanosome, think of it like an ink pot. An ink pot contains ink. That ink is our melanin. It needs to be packaged up nice and tight and securely so it can be transported wherever we want to use that ink. Within your melanocyte, you have the melanosome, which then the chemical reactions occur. Then the melanosome moves up the dendritic arm, and then from the dendritic arm, it gets deposited into the keratinocyte. What revs up our melanocytes to actually produce more melanin and to produce a deeper color in our skin? Well, you do have your natural melanocyte drive, which will create that base layer of color. But there's also other things which are extrinsic and intrinsic. Extrinsic means it's the outside world that's contributing inwards and affecting us. So that's things like UV radiation. It might be medications that you take. It might be, what else is there? There might be pollution that's sitting on the skin, causing irritation, which is then activating your melanocyte. There might also be intrinsic factors. And an example of an intrinsic factor might be something like hormones. It might be something like stress. It might be something like age or genetics. So there are a plethora of ways that your melanocytes are triggered, and this is why, and we're not going to get into it today, but the treatment of pigment in the skin is sometimes troublesome because you need to address all of these different concerns and treat them in a way that is not only topical and internal but also holistically, that it can be quite troublesome. So that's a whole other topic. Let's not get into that. Now, what changes the type of melanin that occurs? Well, it is that exposure, external and internal factors, but also your genetics as well, and also the availability of different proteins and enzymes within the skin, or sometimes what even causes the pigment to occur and to be produced. The people that tend to have the lighter skin types will have pheomelanin, whereas someone who has a darker skin type will have more of the eumelanin. But oftentimes there's this ratio that occurs, and it's just dependent on the melanocyte as to how much genetically it actually wants to produce of each subtype of melanin. It is quite important to understand the ratios and the different types of melanin because they do affect your skin differently when exposed to UV radiation. What happens in the people who have the lighter skin types and also that red-yellow pigment, when UV radiation hits it, that actual pigment tends to oxidize more, and because it oxidizes more, it creates more free radicals. That's why it is so important for everyone to wear sunscreen, but also as well to incorporate something like antioxidants into your everyday routine, even when you have sun protection. That's why you hear things like vitamin C is great for when you go into the sun. It's because it's an awesome antioxidant, which helps to protect somewhat the cells from that oxidative stress that occurs when the UV radiation hits the melanin in your skin. In summary, we all have melanocytes. We all go through melanogenesis. What determines our melanogenesis and the deepness of our skin is genetics, intrinsic factors, and extrinsic factors, which we sometimes can and cannot control. So if you suffer from something like hyperpigmentation, which we won't get into today, but if you do, think of it as a beauty mark. Don't get stressed out about it because, unfortunately, if you stress out about it, that's probably going to make it worse. I hope you all learned something today about the process of melanogenesis and melanocytes. Let me know what you'd like to learn more about in the next coming videos. I'd love to educate you more about all these processes that occur within the skin. See you all next time. Bye.